What's up, residents? Jacob here. Here's another special reading from the book Primitive War. I hope you all enjoy.
The world blurred around Ryan as he charged mindlessly through an endless expanse of bamboo. Leon screamed behind him, and the father T-Rex bellowed tremendously. The mighty behemoth crashed through the jungle behind them. Bamboo cracked and crunched beneath its bulk. Thick reeds fell and struck the ground around Ryan like whipping rods. Damp breath rushed over his back, and he screamed out of pure terror. Ryan opened his eyes, and a branch swung for his face. He ducked, rolled beneath the branch, and scrambled to his feet. Leon shoved him forward as the T-Rex crunched a mouthful of reeds where they had been. Ryan refused to look back, but he could still sense the dinosaur's presence. The forest rocked with each ballistic step. The beast roared, and copper-scented spit sprayed across the back of his neck. The canopy rolled in turbulent waves as animals scurried away from the T-Rex's swinging head and snapping jaws. Hundreds of animals were squawking and screaming, tearing apart the treetops as they fled. It was deafening. Ryan was overwhelmed by the chaos, thoughtless in his instinctual flight. There was no hiding nor fighting. Running was their only option. Ryan and Leon were lost in the forest, veering far away from where their campsite had been. The ground sloped downhill toward the sound of the river. Ryan and Leon hopped across the dips in the earth as the T-Rex pushed through the clattering rods of bamboo. Ryan looked over his shoulder and saw the T-Rex falling behind. It walked slowly downhill, as if it were afraid of twisting an ankle. Ryan was sure that if such a huge beast fell, there would be no saving it. "Hurry, keep going downhill," Ryan shouted. "Head for the river." "Can it swim?" Leon cried. "Doesn't matter, just keep running." Ryan shoved his way around the bamboo and bounded downhill. Gaining momentum, he leapt and hit the pillars of bamboo, swinging around, leaping off again. His vision pulsed with his throbbing heartbeat. The taste of copper was fresh in his mouth. Blood dripped from the dozens of scrapes and cuts that covered his face and forearms. He was intoxicated with his adrenaline. He had never run so hard in his life, not since he escaped a hail of mortar fire in the jungles with Captain McNeil. He remembered the ground exploding around him, the trees collapsing, the fire and smoke that filled the air. The pain of the memory stung in Ryan's gut. But this was worse. Infinitely worse. The rising humidity smothered Ryan and Leon like wet cloth. Their legs bowed. They had been running for what seemed like hours, and their bodies were failing them. Ryan finally glanced over his shoulder and saw the T-Rex weaving downhill in a serpentine pattern. Even from 60 feet away, the Tyrannosaurus looked large enough to swallow the sun. Ryan choked back a scream, and he stumbled. Leon ran into him, and they both went rolling downhill, bouncing across the low rises and lumps of the earth. Rocks scraped Ryan's sides and cracked against his joints. Bamboo shoots sliced through his clothes. He grabbed for purchase, clawed through the soft soil, and got kicked in the head by Leon's flailing boot. The lights switched off in Ryan's head. When Ryan opened his eyes a few seconds later, he was airborne. He screamed and caught a thick column of bamboo to the gut, stopping his flight. He slid down the length of bamboo and dropped into a ditch filled with ferns. Pain flooded his body. Ryan groaned and pushed himself upright. He looked uphill and saw Leon's face twisted in a scream, rushing towards him. Leon crashed into Ryan, and they slammed into the ditch. Coughing and groaning, they pulled themselves back up into a sitting position. Further uphill, the T-Rex was working its way around a final switchback towards them. It walked slowly, sniffing the air. Its muscular body was covered in deep green leather, with the black ringlets of a leopard covering its flank. A shaggy coat of iridescent green feathers covered the behemoth's back, wrapped around its throat in a mane, and created a sharp crest on the back of its skull. The huge head craned back and forth, its dark eyes scanning the forest floor. Leon shivered violently behind Ryan and moaned. Ryan clasped his hand over Leon's mouth and pulled him back beneath the ferns. The footsteps faltered. A baritone growl trembled through the earth like 1,000 bass strings were being plucked at once. Leon seized up in Ryan's grasp. Their faces were close together. Ryan could see Leon's huge eyes tearing up. The look in Leon's eyes was the same as Ryan's when he had gone on his first mission with Vulture Squad. 1,000-yard stare. He was in shell shock. His mind was undoubtedly mute, a hollow skull full of screaming, overwhelming fear. Ryan tried to whisper a reassuring shush, but it came out like a spastic hiss. His jaw was locked shut. The jungle was silent. The T-Rex walked steadily along the base of the hill. In the distance, the mother T-Rex growled like an approaching thunderstorm. Chirps poked the open air. Ryan thought the father T-Rex might return to its nest, but then a wide three-toed foot gripped the edge of the ditch beside him. Ryan glanced sideways and saw scaled talons, like those of an ostrich, inches away from his head. He looked up through the gaps in the ferns and saw the pale underside of the T-Rex's huge set of jaws. The father T-Rex twitched its head in the direction of snapping branches. The eyes were bright and intelligent, very bird-like. The veins that were threaded through its neck pulsed as it inhaled. A thick strand of saliva dangled from its jaws and snapped off, smacking the ferns heavily above Ryan and Leon. Leon seized violently. Ryan struggled to keep him still. The T-Rex lowered its head and barked like an artillery gun. The sound was so forceful that it physically struck them both. The T-Rex snorted heavily and swung its head back and forth. It barked again, short and brisk. It was then that Ryan realized what was happening. The T-Rex had lost them, so it was trying to scare them out of hiding. They could remain hidden and wait the predator out. But how long would that take? The need to run was too great. Ryan was having trouble staying still in the ditch. His adrenaline urged him to flee. Ryan could hear the river gurgling beneath the dinosaur's barks and grunts. He was sure that he was hearing it and not another dinosaur. He wouldn't make that mistake twice. Gauging the river's distance was impossible, but he knew that if he could find it, they could get away. It was a dangerous gambit. Either hide and wait out the T-Rex, or make a run for it. For all Ryan knew, the river could be a mile away. However, the T-Rex could find them any second now. He whispered the plan to Leon. On the count of 3, they would sprint for the river. The T-Rex took another step forward. Ryan stared at the smooth underbelly between the behemoth's legs. He held his fingers in front of Leon's face and whispered the words to himself. 1, 2... Ryan couldn't will himself to lower the third finger. The tension was coiling his muscles so tight that he thought they might burst. His hand trembled from the surging adrenaline. The air in his lungs felt like helium that would make him float away. He knew the T-Rex could outpace them. They had to move, now. Get up, Ryan. Go, you dumb bastard. Go. Go. 3! Ryan and Leon scrambled out of the ditch between the T-Rex's tree trunk legs and ran beneath its thick, swinging tail. The T-Rex turned, and its tail smashed through the bamboo like brittle sticks. Ryan and Leon ducked from the raining splinters. They pumped their arms and kicked through the foliage that grew at the edge of the bamboo forest, sprinting towards the river. Ryan felt a burst of hope. They were going to make it. The T-Rex roared with seismic force as it barreled after them through the forest. The dense expanse of bamboo gave way to an open forest floor, and the behemoth was no longer inhibited amongst the sparse banyan trees. Ryan glanced over his shoulder and saw the Rex closing the distance with ease. In a matter of steps, it would have them in its jaws. Ryan looked ahead and saw the end of the forest floor a few meters beyond a stand of trees. He planted his heel in the ground and staggered to a stop at the edge of a sun-bathed cliff face. Leon stumbled beside him and looked down. The river rushed nearly 60 feet below. The opposite riverbank was a waning moon of white sand surrounded by mangroves. "We have to jump," Ryan shouted. Leon hesitated. They heard the ferocious howl of the Tyrannosaurus and turned to see it smash through the trees at the end of the forest. Its jaws were spread wide, teeth glinting in the sunlight. Leon yelped and leapt off the cliff. Ryan dove after him and screamed as gravity wrenched him down. He caught a glimpse of the sky as he fell. Scorched burgundy and charcoal clouds with an intense yellow sun climbing above the mountains. It was then that Ryan saw the Tyrannosaurus had lost its footing and was falling in after them.